Okay, Jasmine, you said you had a question for when I start class? Okay.
How do you cite the book? Are a lot of people?
Actually, the research paper sample packet, or the research paper packet has the sample paper. In the sample paper, there is the citation for the book. And depending on the edition you have, you would just change like the year and the edition. It depends on which edition that I put on Blackboard, but there's one edition where I left one version of my packet where I left the textbook that he used the same to be accurate to the textbook that he used. And in that version, like it says that it's the 10th edition of the book with the year is like 2013, but this edition y'all have is the 11th. I did change it, so it's right now? Okay. So it might say it's 11th edition and 2016 was the publication date, but then all you would have to change on that citation, if you had the 11th edition and it matched up like that, would be your author, the title of your work, and then the page numbers. So that you could just take that directly from the sample page, or sample works cited page from the research.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I've been done since Saturday and I don't know how to find it.
So you're afraid to like submit. But yeah, that's how you would do it. Other questions before we get moving? Yes.
So can we ask about like what would you think about like if it's good or not?
I mean,
don't know how it's gonna be.
you can. It's a risk because when you voice your idea out loud, there are ears that will hear that idea, and if they decide that's also a good idea, they're like, hey, that's a good idea. I don't have any rules against like stealing ideas. There's not like one person per idea because there's a lot of literature, and some people they really struggle with this, and so if they hear something like Soldiers Home and PTSD, they're like, oh crap, and they write it down. They're like, it's mine. And granted, most of those people who are like freaking out like that, you don't have to worry about, who don't want to put the thought into it because they're probably going to turn their papers late anyway. Turn their papers in late, but some of them might go, oh crap, that's a good topic, I'm going to use it, and then they'll then do the paper really fast and then do it earlier than you, so that then I'm judging you against them instead of them against you. So there is that inherent risk, but you can't ask me.
I'm scared to ask.
I made it terrifying. What's the literature?
The record.
What's the real world issue?
Okay. Human experimenting. It's a good idea.
Human experimenting. And what experiment specifically?
Experiments.
Yeah, they got that far.
I haven't got that far. I was thinking about it.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, if it was
I was not thinking about like how far can we let science go to like till it starts killing people.
the ethics of scientific testing on human subjects.
Oh, was that what?
I would need something pretty specific, otherwise it just sounds like the exact topic of the story.
Okay.
Because it'd have to be something specific happening now that wouldn't have happened then. Otherwise, you're just doing a battle royal and racism against African Americans idea, where it's essentially you're doing the exact same idea from the story, just now. That wouldn't work either, because that's a little too close. The civil rights movement is essentially all about giving. I mean, granted, other minorities were involved too, but I think the main focus in that particular instance of time was racism against African Americans. However, Black Lives Matter is a more recent thing, so that would probably work. Police brutality against African Americans. Yes.
Okay, you told us, even though on Soldiers Home, it would be hard to do PTSD. What is possible, like, through, like, what we need to do, like, modern solutions today of how we should help more the people who are suffering from PTSD?
It wouldn't. Here's the thing, and this is going to be true for all of your papers. You don't have to, as we did in 1301, you don't have to provide specific solutions to the problem. In fact, I generally don't want you to, because that's kind of usually beyond the scope of the story, unless the story the comparison you're making, it makes clear what the solutions would be. The only solution that I could see available in Soldiers Home for dealing with PTSD now in a different war or different wars, I think would be involved with, and I don't want to give too much away, but the way people treat soldiers who might have PTSD. Because the focus in the story, I think, is not on any outside solutions like that, but the focus is on the family, and the focus is on people and how they relate to the soldiers, and the mistaken ways in which they do so. So maybe that could be the focus of a modern times. Yeah.
What about human extinction of Dover Beach?
Say it again.
Human extinction of Dover Beach.
Dover Beach and human extinction. Are we close to human extinction?
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm asking you.
Yeah,
What?
You'll find out after I research it.
That's kind of. Maybe you should also.
How would that work? Explain it to me.
I want to, but I feel like I'm just gonna babble. Like, I understand how it would. But
Babbling is how we
but I
get to the
can't,
truth.
like,
So
word it out. Like, it's in my mind, but I don't know how to
give me
word
your
it.
babbles, and I will try to debabble them.
I should have brought this book.
Hmm?
It's because I said I should have brought this book. Because it's like,
What story?
it's like, it's a, it's like a,
Just come back.
yeah, just come back.
Well, as far as I can see it right now, it just based on
It's
just
like
those.
it's like a, like, I don't know, like a metaphor or a simile towards it. Like, it's hard to explain.
Well, I'm just trying to see if I can make it work in my head, and I can't.
Too complex.
Main reason is that.
This is Dover Beach.
What?
Oh yeah.
Oh, this is Dover Beach.
No,
Never
no,
mind.
no, no, no. I got it. I just got confused for a second because it said
Clearly, this is Dover Beach itself.
I feel like the poem. It almost. Okay, this is how I'm thinking. You're thinking of it. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it almost sounds like that poem. The last stanza specifically, like say, it would work for maybe like The Walking Dead, where somebody's like, let's be true to one another because everybody else sucks, and they're killing each other and eating people, and it's terrible. Other than that, I don't really see how the human extinction, because most of the focus in there is on faith versus science, and the world is changing, and we don't like it. So let's focus on our relationships, because what's there for us otherwise is not as valuable as what we can provide each other. So I mean, unless there's a specific way in which humans are becoming extinct as a result of our human relationships with one another, because again, it's not like, I don't want you talking about necessarily like humans and their environment, or like humans versus like some scientific thing like bacteria. It's going to be like the way in which people relate to each other. So I feel like human extinction might be a hard topic, even if you find a way in which we are going extinct, unless you're saying that we're going extinct by not relating to each other in the ways that we used to.
Oxygen's killing us all.
What?
I saw a thing that says, what if oxygen is what's making us only live for 90 years or something like that?
So we should just get rid of oxygen?
Is it the
I
actual?
don't know.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Alright, so I have a couple, but that's kind of like one of them. What about like people who have like social disorders and like everyone's graduating?
I mean, the problem with that one would be that's literally what's happening. Is she's obviously got some sort of social disorder, and so if you compared it to a specific social disorder or some social disorder that she obviously does not have, but nonetheless is one that's a prevalent problem, and that we're not doing a good enough job with, that would work. But if you just said like social anxiety disorder, I mean, I'd say that's close enough to what she actually has. And I actually feel the same way about Soldier's Home with PTSD. If people just do like, hey, Soldier's Home, he's probably got PTSD, then I don't like that. It's got to be the way in which you've got to relate it thematically to the story and have those themes work out instead of just making a straight comparison that's very boring and I'm like, ugh. And I also don't want people doing like, I know you're probably not planning on doing this, but I don't want people saying like, oh, Rose Frimley, she probably had a social anxiety disorder or a social disorder, because I'm like, it's not, I don't really care if we're trying to figure out what the person in the story had. I'm more interested in what the story is trying to tell us about how we should be relating to each other. What about the other idea?
Well, I don't know.
You're like, I don't know, that was the good one.
Let me see. Hold on.
I'll come back to you. Layla.
Can you just read the top one? I don't want to say it out loud, but. See if I have to do anything. Avert your eye.
Here's the problem is, in order to tell you what I think about it, I would have to ask you how.
How?
And the problem is, that in order to tell me how, you would have to say all of that out loud.
Not necessarily. Okay, so, like. Yeah, I would.
Just say it, Layla.
The problem is, I don't know how the comparison, I guess, is being made. I don't know where the prejudice comes from on the story end.
No, it doesn't. That's the thing. She's stubborn. She is unchanging, just like we are. Or not we, I'm not including myself, but like, just as like people are today.
The problem is the focus in that story, while it is sort of on Emily, a lot of the thematic elements are on the town itself, and dismissing her. And that's part of what the problem is of why she's allowed to get away with what she gets away with. So it's not really necessarily, I mean, all she does is kill a guy. Sidra, come to you?
Yeah, I got like 2.
That's what he's gonna last.
Okay. One of them, it's different, but like, you know how kids are like homeschooled or like, you know, they're obviously different.
Sure.
They're gonna act different.
Socially awkward.
Yeah. And
I
like,
mean,
wouldn't
it's-
that also kind of work with, like, comparing them somewhat?
So which story?
A Rose for Emily.
Oh yeah, because she stays in her little home and her dad doesn't let her do anything. That's a strict parent.
Yeah, the only issue is you would have to write about homeschool sort of in a negative, constricting way. You couldn't write about homeschool in a positive way in that context.
Yeah.
But I guess that would sort of work.
Or like another one would be like foreign exchange students, you know, especially from like a different country who don't know
No.
the language.
That's not a huge problem.
Okay.
Or that's not widespread. There are foreign exchange students, but I think that's why they consider to be a good. So I don't really think that that's going to be as much of an issue. Nobody's going like, oh, we have a huge foreign exchange student problem these days. But, and I don't even think people say necessarily that we have a huge homeschool problem, but if you wanted to interpret homeschool as a problem for the sake of that argument, then you could.
Like when they get out of homeschool onto the real world.
You could. I don't really know. If you did the research and found that actually homeschool seems to work out just great, it'd be kind of a hard paper to write if you find out there's not really any problems with homeschooling. So I mean, it all depends on like what the research tells you, if there's problems with homeschooling at all or if there's not. Might have more luck with charter schools because those suck. Really bad. Like,
Yeah, they do.
they have bad results. Or at least for-profit schools. Yes.
Is global warming a big problem?
Oh my god.
Which story?
Dover Beach.
That's the only climate one, I think.
Talk about
Oh my God.
the ice man.
You didn't
Ah,
get it.
I'll block you.
Here's the thing with Dover Beach. Strangely, I think the only way that I don't think that one would work with global warming. If we're talking Dover Beach, as far as I can see it, because what it would work with is perhaps, and this is strange, but at that time he's decrying. Is that right? Decrying, bemoaning, mourning. Is that the right word? Decry. To depreciate, to express strong disapproval of. Yeah. He is decrying the essentially replacement of a scientific evidentiary world where we have to have visual evidence, we have to have some kind of evidence, replacing that, like taking that, and that's now what we're doing instead of faith. Like faith is sort of taking a back seat to evidentiary proof. Ironically, I think that the best way to approach that for a paper topic these days is essentially, I don't even know if that would work. Because Dover Beach is saying like faith is something we're losing and it's bad, and we're replacing it with like science. And the problem is that these days it seems like we're having quite literally the opposite problem. Whereas like if you compared Dover Beach, like you'd have to compare Dover Beach with something like the denial of global warming or the denial of vaccinations as a good.
So you have to do a denial of...
You would literally have to like talk about how like the problem, Dover Beach, I can totally understand what he's saying, is that there's a problem in the world at that time where everybody's just going, let's not do anything unless science suggests we should. These days it seems like our problem is sort of the opposite, where we've sort of figured out a way to reconcile faith and science. People believe in science and religion at the same time. It doesn't seem to be a problem. It does require you either to have a sort of cognitive dissonance with things like, the virgin birth and, I wouldn't even say the virgin birth, but like the 7 days of creation, or like the time frame in which my dad fully believes that the world is 20,000 years old. And I'm just like, I can't possibly think that. So I reconcile. I'm like, okay, it's sort of a parable type deal. But there's people who've sort of reconciled those ideas these days, so that's not really as much of a problem as it was in Dover Beach's time. What is a problem is people who've sort of flipped it the other way, where they're like, I don't want to vaccinate because that's not real. Like, that doesn't work. Or climate change is not a thing. So people are denying the truth as a result of that they no longer have faith in science or even education. So that could be, it's a different faith. It's like what you have faith in. And people are sort of losing faith in evidence, which is very strange, in favor of, I don't even know what, just their instincts. So you could do Dover Beach with global warming, but it'd essentially be like the denial of global warming, yeah.
Okay.
That was a very long answer for
That wasn't very
Sarah.
What about child abuse and barbarism?
What kind of child abuse?
like
I would say the only way, the only way to make it different enough to make it not the same topic as the story, because I'd say that he is smacked at least once, right? So that's physical abuse, that's in there. Psychological abuse, that's in there. The only thing I think would maybe work in terms of the abuse of a child would be sex abuse, which definitely is not happening in the story, or sex trafficking. I think either of those would work because they're completely different than what the story has, but they do involve an adult taking advantage of a younger person for personal gain.
Okay, I guess I was kind of confused on like what I was supposed to do because I was thinking like it's supposed to like directly tie in, but you would rather same concept but different ways.
Right. It's actually sort of like the opposite of what you just said. but I think you were thinking the right thing when you just like said the opposite of how I would say it, which is different concept, same way. Which is like it's a completely different concept, the thing from the story and the thing that you're doing the real world issue over. However, both work in the exact same way. The function of each is similar. So if we did psychological or physical abuse of a child, that's literally what's sort of happening in the story. And I don't want you like doing a literal one-to-one. This is literally what's happening in the story. I'm just sort of trying to explain it. What I want you doing is taking a different situation that's happening in the world today that is a problem, but that sort of functions in the same way as the problem in the story. So you could take the way he treats his child in barn burning and compare that to the way that child sex traffickers treat the children that they have in their employ, or whatever, not employ, they're not employing them, but so it works the same way, even though they're two different concepts. Because that's what I was. Literally, you know that, oh, okay, in barn burning, there is no sex trafficking, there's no sex abuse. So that opens that comparison up to, because I'm trying to basically, because I think that the value in the stories that we read and the poems that we read is not necessarily like, you know, like, oh, Misfit kills somebody, so we shouldn't have guns, that sort of thing. It's not that. It's thematically how things work, like how people relate to each other, and how can we broadly apply those to even all kinds of situations that you wouldn't even normally think to apply those to. Like, I think it's a pretty, what is it? I'm trying to think of like, what's a movie y'all have seen recently? Like a good one. What about a good one?
That is a good one.
It was okay.
The Rock.
Here's the problem I had with Jumanji is that The Rock was not acting like The Rock, and that was all I wanted.
Oh, I know.
He was acting like a nerdy kid, and I was like, I want to see The Rock being The Rock. I literally just want him to be the same character in every role he ever plays. They perfectly cast him as Maui and Moana. Perfectly. Because I was like, he's being The Rock, just like a mythological demigod version of The Rock. And that was the problem that I had with that. I'm trying to think of a movie that... Here's the thing, is like, if we say something like Black Panther, you can relate Black Panther to... You haven't seen it, but I think you can... Basically, the thing about Black Panther is that there's a lot of... You could relate it to, like, Michael B. Jordan in that movie, like, there is... Well, not necessarily Michael B. Jordan, but... There's an implication that black people aren't doing enough to help each other, those who can help each other. And so you can relate that to stuff that's going on today with race specifically. But, again, that's sort of too much of a one-to-one relationship. I'm trying to think of a situation where it's a movie we've all seen, we know.
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast? I can't do the modern. Well, and see, this is how I would approach all the ideas, okay? So I'm not going to do, like, Beauty and the Beast and what's obvious, which would be, like, somebody... People not... It's something involving, like, romantic relationships. I would think thematically what's happening in that story. I mean, this is very broadly put, but, like, thematically, don't judge a book by its cover, or... what is on the surface is not always what's inside.
What about a boy in a striped pajama?
What is that?
Nobody knows what that is, so I can't use that one.
It's a good movie.
Not too much.
People have heard of it, but they don't know what it is. They might be like, oh, yeah, okay. People know what Beauty and the Beast is, I think. A lot of people do.
What type of movie are you, like, wanting?
Well, I'm not wanting a movie at all. I wanted something I thought everybody in the room had seen, or most people in the room had seen. So in Beauty and the Beast, you know, like, people... Essentially, the story starts off with he misjudges someone and is cruel to her for no reason, and so he becomes a beast. And so I guess the temptation for Beauty, Belle, is to do the same to the beast, is to judge him by the way that he looks. But the key to that movie was for him to overcome essentially his, I guess, the internalization of his external form. So he goes from being a monster who's beautiful Right. He goes from being a monster who's beautiful to having to become, and when I say monster who's beautiful, I mean like when he was a king and he was not a beast yet, okay? He goes from being a monster on the inside but beautiful on the outside as a prince to making the wrong decision, then she turns him into a whatever. And then, yeah, sort of. And then he gets turned into this beast thing. So he's literally a beast on the outside too. So he's a monster not only on the inside but the outside. And the way that he fixes it is he has to go from being a monster on the outside and a monster on the inside to being a monster on the outside, yet somehow a soft and loving individual on the inside. So I guess the idea here is that, people can change. And so you need to relate it not to something like romantic relationships because that's too easy. That's what's happening in the story. But it's maybe a scenario in society in which we assume there's certain people who will be a certain way. Here's a good one. You could do like the police shootings. The police shootings that we, lots and lots of
Assumption.
Did you hear about there was a guy a couple weeks ago who, or maybe a month ago, he was in his backyard. He was on a cell phone. He got shot.
They thought he was like roaming the house or something. What?
It was his own yard, and they shot him. And I guess I think he died. I don't know. But so that would be a good comparison. So it's like the police looks at that guy and thinks he's a threat and shoots him.
I think they just want to shoot him.
Right, and that's a problem. And that would be the problem that you could relate to Beauty and the Beast, is that for whatever reason, these people are thinking that these people are monsters on the inside, and they need to really not change. They need to change themselves on the inside to fix that problem. And so you can see that both of those scenarios are completely different. Beauty and the Beast and racial profiling for cops and police brutality. They're completely different ideas. But that's the ideas that I want, are the ones who are like taking a theme and using that theme to relate it to something entirely different.
Oh, okay, so that's what this whole conversation.
Right. Sarah, I never stopped talking about your idea. I was sort of still talking about it, so I'm going to... Okay, well then I'm going to go to Cade first, then I'm going to come back to you. Okay, Cade.
How many sources do you need?
You need 6, but one of them is the textbook. So you need 5 others, just like the research paper from 1301. However, this time you need 2 about your literature and 3 about your real-world issue, or 1 about your literature and 4 about your real-world issue. Yeah. And I also posted a video as well. Were you absent one day?
Probably.
Oh, okay, that's probably what it was. I remember there was one day you might have been absent, so that's probably what it was. But yeah.
Okay, I'm kind of confused on how to write a thesis statement for this.
Yeah.
Could you do an example of how you would write one for the situation?
Did you say
Beauty and the Beast?
Did you say it would be hard to write a thesis?
Yeah, the thesis is going to be the hardest thing that you come up with, because it's a matter of getting it right. Because once you've got it set, once you have the thesis set, that's essentially going to govern your entire research. So I guess I'll write a thesis about Beauty and the Beast. Other questions while I'm writing the Beauty and the Beast setup?
Are you a morning person?
I hate the morning. I absolutely hate the mornings. If I didn't have to wake up, I wouldn't.
I hate all day.
I'd come to school at like 11 or noon if I could. But then I would still only teach till like 3. Let's see. Where's the best way to do this? And I'm only doing this, I know it feels to some of you, I think, like a waste of time to be talking about it like in terms of Beauty and the Beast. But I'm trying to do something I know nobody can steal, so. Let me do blue here, because I got my subjects already, right? Normally you would put your story or your poem in quotes, but I'm doing this italicized because films and books, full books, are italicized, not in quotes. Just in case you were wondering. And then what did I have? What was it? Racial profiling? So that's a big subject, but that's my subject. So now I've got to relate these and show similarities. So I need to have a claim about them. Let's see. I would have an intro that introduces the idea of, let's say the problem is assumptions of outward appearance can be false. We'll have a paragraph about that. Then I'll have a paragraph summarizing Beauty and the Beast, but I'll summarize it specifically in a way that Beauty and the Beast is like mostly about judging others by their appearance and the importance for not doing that. Then I'll have a paragraph about the huge problem of racial profiling in America by police officers. Then I'll have a sentence like this. So, in much the same way that the beast is judged and judges solely based on appearance at the detriment of, it takes a long time to word this right, to the detriment of
It's a little harder when it's done.
Okay, I'm trying to find a way that, in a way that ignores. Oh, okay. That ignores, not ignores, his humanity. What's the word for ignores, but like downplays?
Dismisses.
Dismisses. In a way that dismisses his humanity. Police officers in the United States have profiled African Americans to the point that violence against them is outsized and inhumane. Now the problem here is it's obvious it's inhumane to profile somebody. Here's the problem. Usually I would separate this with red as the claim and then the green as the reasoning. But I'm sort of pushing the claim and the reasoning together. I don't know if you can tell. It's sort of already built into it. It's not separated. So let's see. Oh, in Beauty and the Beast is judged and judges solely based on appearance. In much the same way that the Beast and Beauty and the Beast is judged and judges solely based on appearance in a way that dismisses humanity, police officers in the United States have profiled African Americans to the point that violence against them is outsized and completely inhumane. Let's make that the blue. And that the blue. And I may just make a new sentence here. Well, I've already kind of done that sort of. In fact, if I was to do this in the way where I don't have the claim built in, it would probably be something like the Beast in Beauty and the Beast is similar to the police officers in the United States profiling African Americans in a sense that the Beast both judges and is judged. So it's sort of like, this is like, I guess, what did I say it was green for the claim?
I think so.
So I know it's weird, like they're the same is basically, they're the same in the way that is sort of the red part. It's because I've condensed it, sort of. Like, it's so condensed that there's no need for the red part as much. It's sort of built into the reasoning itself.
But it doesn't have to have, like, an event, because that one doesn't have, like, an event. Like you said, Black Lives Matter, it's more, like, broad.
Right, because I'm probably going to call on a number of different events for this. And it'd probably be better if I could actually find studies where people have looked at how many African Americans die as opposed to like what the odds are if you're white and coming into contact with a police officer that you're going to die compared to somebody who's African American coming in contact with a police officer and you're going to die. Because the odds are far higher if you're African American.
So, remember how I was talking about mine, about human experimenting? You said the ethics. You said you want me to find, like, research on that. So you want me to find, like, different studies, like, specifically, like, a broad studies. Like 2 or 3 specific studies that show how it's bad.
How what's bad?
How human experimenting is bad.
Yeah, but what I'm really interested in that scenario is not just broad human experimenting, because that covers what happens in the story. But I would want specifically a different type of human experimenting that is different than what's happening in the story. So not something like getting rid of blemishes or, trying to improve people's appearances, but some other type of human experimentation, even if it's for, like, health reasons. But it's just not something where you're, like, trying to remove birthmarks or do some sort of cosmetic thing, I guess, in that scenario. That doesn't mean that birthmark and cosmetic surgery and the prevalence of it today won't work as a topic if anyone is thinking of doing that, because that's a different idea, because that idea is focusing more on her reaction to the opinions of others. But in this topic where you're doing, like, the ethics of human experimentation, that's focused more on Aylmer, so it would need to be a different type of experimentation. So it's just a complicated idea. So does this Beauty and the Beast idea make sense? So you see how long it took me to come up with that? And I've done this so much that I can come up with it fast. So, I mean, very well, you may be sitting there and looking at it for like an hour until it actually comes to you. Or trying to figure out just the right word to make both of them the same. Because I had to come up with a way, like the dismisses word was killing me until, I mean, if Layla hadn't been there, I don't know if I could have, it would have been 15 minutes till I came up with that word. I would have left it as ignores for a while. Yes, Hyla.
So I know you said that we need 2 stories, like, over the literature, right? But, like, what are we actually finding within the articles about them?
It's a weird, it's almost, the burden, there's a higher burden on you this semester on the research. And in fact, I'll go ahead and let you know, I don't know if I already mentioned this, but on the research presentation, last semester you had to get up and talk about your 5 articles and then sit down. This semester, you get up and you don't even mention your articles, really. You talk about the arguments you made and every point in your argument that shows the similarity and what the importance of that similarity was between the story and the real world issue. So the focus here is on the argument that you've come up with and the original approach that you take to it. So when you're saying like what exactly are we supposed to find from that literature, it's sort of up to you. Whatever helps you in making that comparison. If you find that this author, like one of these scholars wrote, well, this author always takes this approach in stories and always talks about this certain thing, and you're like, ooh, that really helps me talk about the relationship to this real world material, then that would be helpful. So I mean, but there's not any specific thing that I'm wanting you to get out of the article. It's just, and what I want you to stay away from is factual material that could also be found in the story. In fact, I would say that the sample paper toes the line on that a little bit. Did we actually read the sample paper, the research paper? No?
I think we did. Wait.
But this is Black Veil. I think I may have taken you through the beginning of it. I don't think I read the whole thing. But if we do look at this, like the sample paper.
I think we read the whole first half.
The whole first half.
I think, pretty sure.
I like the idea that there's the whole first half. Like there's a part here where he sort of he gets a little risky, I think, in the way that he approaches the. Let me see. Like, let's see. From this, the reader begins to get a feeling of animosity between the town and the Reverend, which I think is sort of a risky like thing to say. I feel like I could get that from the story. I don't need an author, a scholar to tell me that. But he does cite Ferris again in different ways, so I was okay with that, I think. He doesn't even mention a word about the populated town. Instead, sits down and does not say a word. Again, I find that a little bit. It's quoting from an article what factually happens in the story, and I prefer that you get opinions of the writers that you're using, not facts that could also be just found in the story, not plot elements. Other than that, I really don't have any sort of guidelines for what needs to be taken. Now, when it comes to the real world issue, you very well could just be finding facts. The facts are available in the story, so that's fine. Like, here's what happened. Like, that's going to be in the story, so that's why I don't want you taking that from the articles. But in the real world issue, you're giving us the real world issue. You may end up only getting like the facts of the real world issue and putting that from those articles. Depends. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay, good. Sarah.
On Academic Search Complete, I found an article, but it didn't have a PDF file. It only had HTML full text. How do you download that thing? I didn't see a download button like it was in PDF.
What kind of computer do you have? Does that have Windows 10?
Oh no.
Do you have Google Chrome?
Yes.
Here's what you do. It's going to be weird. It may not look pretty, but you hit Control P, which does print. And in the drop-down box where you pick your printer, here, I'll show you. I don't have to do much, but see, let's say that I want this whole Wikipedia page about Ignaz Semmelweis. Then I hit Control P. I change my printer from whatever my printer is to save as PDF. Google Chrome has that option. And then instead of print, it says save. And so you just save a copy. Hopefully, it looks pretty. And it's not, going to be super, super ugly. Like, this actually looks decent. It very well could be that, like, the formatting of the website makes it to where all of the text appears in one tiny column this wide. And that would be awful. You wouldn't want to mess with that. So,
I mean, if anything, I can just keep going back to it, but I was just wondering if there was a...
There's another option, which, if I wanted to do this, I could. So, I have this little load-in, like, plug-in for Google Chrome called Fireshot. And I've always had it, but I just use it at random whenever I need it. And so, what it does is it takes, like, how you can do, like, has somebody do print screen before? If you hit print screen on a computer, it copies the whole page. You can go paste it into Paint. So you hit print screen, and then you can open like Paint, and then you hit paste, and see everything that was on your screen at that time is now on the document, like on the thing. because that's what print screen does, is it actually copies your whole page. The problem is sometimes you want to copy like an entire website. You want to scroll down and keep hitting print screen and then paste into the bottom of the next thing. It's annoying. So somebody realized that, and they made a Google plugin called Fireshot. And so what you do is you capture entire page. And what it does is it goes down and basically does screenshots of the whole document on its own. And then at the end, pulls it up and shows it to you and gives you the option to save it. And it'll literally look exactly as it looked on the web page. It won't look any different. Usually it just pops up immediately after. I don't know why it's not doing that. But it would pop up and it would say, hey, here's how to... So that is sort of a weird technical question that does have answers, but... Yo, what's up, bro? Why didn't you do anything? Let's try it again. Capture... I already did that. And... Let's do this. Capture entire page. Okay. It's capturing, it's just not doing anything. Usually it says end edit. No, I don't care about this. Oh, there we go. No! I don't want an app. You're dumb. Options. I don't know what that means. Maybe Wikipedia's got it like blocked. Like you can't do that with Wikipedia. I mean, I could always do it on my. So capture entire page. I wonder if I put it in a different window. That'd be weird. Nope. Did I put it in Microsoft? Nope. I wonder if I can still paste it into a Paint document. It very well could be that Google Chrome updated itself, it doesn't work anymore. No, that's still, I don't know what's going on. So maybe Fireshot's broken, so that's not a good option. Maybe just save as PDF. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Watch it like halfway through like my talk, we're going to be. What if it was because I had Paint open? One more time. Here we go, guys. Boom. Now. Other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so a rose for Emily, she ended up killing someone because like everybody kind of discussed her and like did really things that she did to her.
Yeah.
And whatever she was going through or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like how we ignore like mentally ill or challenged people and pretend like they don't exist in our society, and then sometimes that ends up being bad, like school shootings or like they hurt themselves, and like no one notices until it's too late.
That'll work. As long as you can find large studies on mass shooters, mass killings that show that they had mental illnesses, and those were the ignorance of that could have been prevented. Yeah.
And then I think political leaders making choices that many inconsiderate decisions made and others in danger.
Yeah, as long as there's specific decision making that you're talking about.
I have to find, but
Okay.
that's
Yeah, that would work. Assuming that the decisions made are
the country as a whole,
relevant.
and then it ended up bad. Like,
Yeah.
not necessarily ours.
In specifically a dangerous way.
Yeah.
That would have to be necessary. Other questions? You ready to move on?
Oh, wait.
Yes.
Sorry. Killings and like gang violence, like how would that affect revenge, like how can like get revenge if like share revenge?
No. I don't want that one.
Yeah.
Don't care about that one.
Scratched it.
Because I don't think that, while gangs are a problem, I don't think that the vengeance of gangs is the problem. It's the gangs of the problem. So, yes.
Can we email you later if we have an idea that we don't really want to say out loud?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can do that. The only worry that I have is if I get 35 emails, one from each student, asking me about their ideas, and then it might be untenable for me to answer them. So I just tentatively I'll say. But if I notice there are so many emails that I might as well just wait until I start grading The plantings themselves, I may just do that.
We can talk it over PUBG.
What?
We can talk it over PUBG.
I don't talk during PUBG. I gotta win. I got to rank 118 this weekend of everybody on, yeah, only on solo first person North American server. But still, that's pretty good. And then I dropped to 264 last night because I had 2 crappy games. But then I got back and got second in one game. My wife walked in right when I was like last final 2, and I'm like, "What are you?" And I'm like, "I can't." I died. I should have sat back with my car and shot the guy in the head, but so dumb. Anyway, anything else?
So like she walks in and you can't do anything after that.
No, she's really attractive. I can't pay attention to anything else. Okay. Let's see. So strangely, we are still going to talk about something. There was no way to avoid that. Eventually it would happen. This just means that we sort of have to shove Emily Dickinson into mostly a day instead of spending all this time talking about Emily Dickinson. I think what we'll do is start out with, on 840, if you got your book with you, you can turn to 840. If you don't have your book with you, look these up on your phone so you can follow. And we will talk about Emily Dickinson, whose poetry I mostly hate. It's kind of like I like what she's saying, I hate the way she's saying it. Much like Mike Judge. Anybody heard of Mike Judge? Do you know who that is? He's a director, producer, writer. You ever heard of King of the Hill? The TV show? I thought that show was funny and had funny moments, but I hated it. Hated the style of it. Hated the pacing of it. It seemed slow. Additionally, there's a movie called Office Space. Love the movie Office Space, but only because of the things that it's doing. I think that it's actually a poorly written story. But I like the concept. Also, Beavis and Butthead. I can't even look at that thing. It sucks so much. Some of the ideas in it were funny. And one of my favorite things, something that applies perfectly to now, Idiocracy. Have you ever heard of that movie?
Yes.
It's a movie called Idiocracy, where essentially a guy, he's in a time capsule, he's been cryo frozen, and for some reason they don't find him, and he wakes up 200 years or 300 years later, and he goes and he takes this, they find him and they're like, "Who are you?" And it's there's some computer that shows who he is, and they're like, "Well, we got to figure out what to do with you in society, so you're going to take this test." And so he goes and takes this test. It's a basic test. It's what shape is this?
Yeah, he's the smartest.
What's 2 plus 2? And they determine that the IQ test they give him is that he's now the smartest man on the planet. And their president is elected, and he's a professional wrestler. And he's on his third or fourth term. Something like that. It's ridiculous. But the problem is they can't grow plants anymore. They don't know why.
They're using Powerade.
Yeah, they're using Gatorade to water all the plants. And they said he's like, "Well, you're using Gatorade to water all the plants. That's not going to work. It's going to kill them." They're like, "But Gatorade, it's what plants crave," because that's what's on all the billboards. And so nobody understands anything anymore. They're all dumb because everything has become so stupid in reality TV, and basically people's brains have just degraded to the point that it's. And I hate the movie. I hate it. I just think it's poorly written. The story is bad. I mean, the acting is terrible. I don't know what is wrong with this guy, but he has great ideas that he just punishes me with in the stylistically the worst ways. It's just unbelievable, and that's how I feel about Dickinson. Love her ideas. I think she's saying really great stuff. She's just saying it in a really off-putting way. Did anybody watch the March for Our Lives stuff? Any of it, or see it on YouTube or anything?
I was there.
So it was that you were there in Florida. Oh, they actually had them all over the United States. I don't think it was just in Florida. They had bunches of little. One of the bigger ones was in Washington, I think.
Yeah, they had
But there was one kid. I think I might have mentioned this kid to you before. He was a journalism student at his school, and he wants to major in RTV, radio, television. I think his dad might be a politician or been involved in politics before, and he's become one of the faces of this movement. And he's like, you've probably seen him. He's like the one, he's like the cute guy who they always show talking about the Parkland stuff. He was the one that called for people boycotting Florida on spring break, like just not going there until they change something about the guns, trying to affect their economy because it's a huge part of their economy. As people like going like Fort Lauderdale and stuff for spring break. But when I watched him talk, oh my gosh, I hated his speech. It was the most annoying thing. It was like a really bad preacher. And I liked the ideas he was putting forth. I did not like the extreme degree of pathos that was being used as opposed to logic. Like I felt like it was, I don't know, I felt like I was watching like warmongers talk or something, like a Hitler or Stalin or something. It was very strange. I liked what he was saying. I was like, yeah, he's got it. His heart's in the right place. I just don't like the method by which he's delivering his message. The way in which he constructed, and it sounded so forced. It didn't sound natural. It didn't sound from the heart. I don't know. There's lots of ideas out there. I'm sure you've seen them before, where like you really appreciate what's being said. You just don't like the way in which it's being said, and that's how I feel about Dickinson. And I want to let y'all know, and I'm saying this to let you know, that it's fine to not like a poet, and you can still respect what they say in spite of not liking how they say it. Let's talk about what I assume is probably the one most people talked about, which is some keep the Sabbath going to church. Is that right? Most people talked about that one on discussion posts? That was mostly discussed?
Only like 5.
Huh?
Only like 5 of us.
Really? Okay, well, good job, y'all. Usually I have most people, they're like, oh, church. Talking about this one. They're like, regardless of what it's about. I will choose this one. So, and it says circa 1860 because only 11 poems were published in her lifetime and only one by her choice. However, she wrote 1,800 of them.
What?
She had 1,800 poems.
Yeah.
So when it says circa 1860, they don't know exactly when it was written. They can only guess because it was kind of found amongst her things. So here it is. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home. With a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. Hate all the daggum dashes, the capitalization, commas where we don't need them. It just drives me nuts. What?
It's
just
breaks.
pauses, breaks. Just whenever she feels like it, I guess.
Basically just puts whatever.
Because sometimes she ends with a comma, sometimes she ends with a dash. I don't know if I'm supposed to pause for a long time, but it feels incredibly unnatural if I do. I don't know. So, what do you guys think this poem meant when you read it? Yes?
That some people like have to go to church publicly and like go to church to praise God and worship, whereas like she can just stay home and do the same thing and be going to the exact same place, doing what she wants to do, wearing what she wants to wear, out in nature, appreciating God every single day versus just one day a week.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I'd say it's a very like pro cowboy church type idea, or like pro staying home on Sundays and kind of working with tools or working out in the yard or something, and saying that's how I get it.
That's how you praise God.
That's how I praise God.
She relates.
I was saying, she doesn't find the normal approach to the Sabbath. She doesn't like it.
Appealing to herself.
Yeah, she doesn't like it. She would rather just experience her own stuff and see God through her own life and go that way to heaven.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true for her. I have a slightly more negative thought on it. I don't know. I don't necessarily even think that this is the case, but it's a possibility. Did anybody read the blue poem, Faith is a Fine Invention? It was blue, so you couldn't write about it. So did anybody read it? No. That poem causes me to have less positive thoughts on this one. So I think that the comparison is sort of being made, and you sort of see it, where it all seems positive the whole time. So some keep the Sabbath going to church, I keep it staying at home. Bobolink, so it's a bird for a choir member. Orchard for a dome, so it's like, instead of choir, we have bird.
Instead of a
dome, we have orchard, so you're thinking about the orchard and bird, and you're also thinking over here about the church with the dome and the guy in the choir. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice, so holy robes, so you're thinking like a preacher or something like that, or like a bishop, wearing like the holy robes. And then I just wear my wings, and I think that relates later in the poem to where she says, so instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. So she's already in heaven to her, so she's already got her wings. So she's not trying to eventually earn them, she's got them. I was sort of rushing this so I can get to my ideas. And it says, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sextons sing. So there's no bell like gong, gong, gong. It's a very much lighter bird going tweet, tweet. And that's how church, it's time for church. Because it's always, nature's happening. Now, here's the issue that I have. So she says, instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along, because nature's so nice, right? But God preaches a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. Everything that's talked about so far is that church is not necessarily negative. She just prefers nature, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, think about how much better a bird is than a choir singer, or an orchard is than a dome. Those are all much nicer. However, she says, and the sermon is never long. So there is an implication that the sermon, the part where you're actually learning about God.
Not enough time.
Huh?
Like there's more like singing than actually learning.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. She's actually acting like the learning is bad. Because if there's a long sermon, that's a negative. That's the implication here. So to spend too much time learning about God is a negative thing. Yeah, you get tired of it. You're like, oh. And so maybe that's the implication. Maybe we should spend more time praising, or she's just saying that sometimes sermons feel long. Maybe it's not as disparaging as I think. But I do have a problem with her. She says, like, God preaches a noted clergyman. There's some people you feel like you can joke with, friends. Like let's say one of y'all is like really good at playing guitar, right? And you've got like one of your friends is like super good at playing guitar. And they play like a song in front of you, like they're just sitting there playing and they do this like crazy solo, and you can't play crap, and then they get done, and they're like, what did you think of that? I just made that up like recently. And you're like, eh. You're like, what? You're like, I'm just kidding. It was really good. And so, but you can do that with friends, right? And so, but I feel like this, and like you might say about your friend, like, any of y'all play guitar or something? He's pretty crappy at it, but he can. And you're like, shut up. And they're like, nah, he's really good. But you can do that with friends and like joke. But she's sort of joking with God here, which I don't really think happens a lot. She's like, God preaches, like God's the one delivering the message through nature. And she says he's a noted clergyman. And this could be taken one of two ways, which is in a kind of a jokey way, a noted clergyman, where it's like, noted clergyman, of course he's the clergyman, like he's the head of the whole religion, so yeah. But she came from a community that was largely involved in the Puritan religion, very strict. So to say something like this, I think, would almost be considered, I would think, relatively blasphemous. To say that God is merely a noted clergyman, or that God could ever be taken down to that level. And so, like, I kind of think that that's a possibility here, is that this could be a disparaging look, not just at organized religion, but kind of an insult to God, at least in those two lines. And I have a reason that I think that, and we don't really have time for it today. I can quickly just jump over to Faith is a Fine Invention real fast, which is on page 859, so it's quite a few pages over. And we'll have to get to all the details of this next time, but I can just briefly, it's a 4-line poem. So in quotes, the word faith. Faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. And you can take that as in just the idea of faith, or you can take it probably as she did mean it, being in such a religious community. and her parents were heavily involved in the church. But I think it was the First Church of Amherst. She literally calls faith, and I think it's going to be not just like faith, the concept, but faith is like, religious faith is a fine invention, as though man made it. And it's fine when gentlemen can see. So if you have the answer right in front of you and you have faith, well, yeah, it's going to turn out. But like when people are like trying to pray sickness away, like people in Parkland, so I'm going to send you my thoughts and prayers, because I'm sure as hell not giving up my guns. Did y'all hear like Matthew McConaughey? I don't know why, I just love hearing Matthew McConaughey talk. He spoke at like the Austin version of that. He was like, I love guns, y'all, or something like that. He was like, but civilians do not need assault rifles. And they were like, yeah! He's like, yeah. Anyways, but, so people are like, sort of the Parkland thing. People are tired of thoughts and prayers. People want action. And I think the same thing here is that she's like, you can have faith all you want, but actual action and, finding evidence and figuring out what really works, that's what's going to fix things, not, putting your hand on somebody's head and hoping the cancer shoots out. I think that's probably what she was seeing and didn't like it. We'll get to that more next time and get more details. Y'all have a good one.